What if you became the scientist of your own life and you apply this to finances, relationships, work?
Anne-Laure Lecomte is a neuroscientist and the author of Tiny Experiments. She says we need to change the way we look at success. Because how often do you actually question your financial goals?
You'll notice there are so many areas where it's just a script. It's not based on any reality, any actual data, and it's maybe worth experimenting with that.
What do you think are some good tips for people to make some changes in the new year?
Can I say something a little bit controversial?
Absolutely, That's why you're here.
Okay, so let go of goals, let go of New Year resolutions. That's what everybody does, right? You decide on something you want to do, and then you work really hard to get it. And I would really encourage people this year to try and experiment a little bit more. Be a bit more curious. Let go of trying to copy-paste whatever success looks like for other people. And maybe ask yourself, what is something I can try when it comes to money, finances, etc.? What is something I want to explore? And I'm not sure it's going to work. I'm not sure it's for me, but I'm going to give it a little try. And there are lots of areas in life, obviously, where it's easier if you stick to a plan. But sometimes delaying those decisions a little bit and making a little bit more space for having more options can lead to better outcomes and more fun in the process.
I agree with the more fun, but I'm not sure if it's always better outcomes. I do everything last minute and I just kind of go with the flow. We went on holiday and Damien's like, book your plane tickets. And I was like, I'll book it. And I booked it like a few days before. So it was cheaper. It was more expensive, but I had less stress and I had a great time. Is it practical always in life for people to leave things like last minute? Normally, if you leave things late, it costs more or you can't plan. So are there downsides to this?
The other, before you answer, the other side to that as well was me and my friends checking the flight every day to make sure there was still flights left. And we tell him there's one seat, book it. So actually, his laissez-faire attitude is our stress. Do you know what I mean? We were managing that situation. And he's like, oh yeah, I always book last minute, it's fine.
I think the key word here is intentionality.
Yeah.
So instead of just doing it at random and just because you're busy or too stressed to even think about it, just being a little bit intentional. And that's part of what's interesting in terms of learning about yourself, what works and what doesn't also, is just doing things differently from the way you normally do them. So if you're the kind of early planner, normally, I would experiment with what it looks like to wait a little bit and see what maybe last minute deals come up this time if for once you don't plan in advance. And obviously only do this if you can afford it. If you can afford for the experiment to not be conclusive. If in the end it's like, actually that did cost more money and that wasn't worth it. Now you know, actually, like scientists, right? So you just test it and then you decide if it works for you. If you're the kind of person who's more last minute, maybe you can experiment with saying, even though you're like, I always do it last minute and it's always fine, saying, what about if this time I listen to my friends and I actually plan in advance? What does that feel like? And comparing it. And maybe the answer is that actually that didn't do anything for me. I don't care about saving the little bit of money I saved. And it made me more stressed to have to plan in advance. Or you'll discover that maybe actually I'd like to be more of a planner. That works better for me. So as you can see, this is not like a rigid linear goal. The definition of success is not I'm going to get there. The definition of success is I'm going to learn something new. As long as you learn something new, the experiment was successful. And I discovered this method when I did my studies in neuroscience. That's what they teach you. That's how you do experiments. And at the time I figured, what would that look like if you took this and you applied that to your life? What if you became the scientist of your own life and you apply this to finances, relationships, work, anything that you do? You can look at it, ask a question, design an experiment, collect that data, and then see what the result is like.
Are there anything particularly in life or any goals that people chase that you think they should perform experiments around rather than blindly chasing?
Any goal that was inspired by other people around you, I think, is worth at least questioning. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad. Again, it's the intentionality. If you experiment and you figure out, actually, that thing my mom has been telling me to do for 20 years that I've been doing, I'm going to try to do it differently. And I find out that, she was so right, actually. I'm just going to stick to the way she said to do it. This is new knowledge that is really useful because now you have the conviction that you're doing things in a way that actually makes sense for you and not because someone told you to do it this way. So anytime you notice that you've been doing something because you've been copying and pasting it, in psychology, we call that cognitive scripts. And those are scripts that we follow that have been embedded in our minds based on just observing what other people are doing. An example you see in research papers is that if you go to the dentist, for example, you're not going to start opening your mouth in the waiting room and ask them to check your teeth, right? You have a cognitive script that tells you, and you never think about it, right? That you go in the waiting room, they're going to call your name. And then you go in the doctor's office and then you open your mouth, right? And it's the same in life, for example. We have this cognitive script that we need to go to university, finish our studies, and then get a first job. Once we're eligible, we can get a mortgage and we can buy a house. And once we do that, and then an A and B and C, right? There's nothing inherently bad about this process and those steps, right? But experimenting is about asking yourself that question, is that really what I want to do? Is there a different way to do things? And am I being intentional in those choices that I'm making?
So I'm looking for a new car currently.
Always.
My car's always in the garage and, my crypto's doing quite well. So I'm like, time to buy a car. Do you think, would my cognitive script be, instead of, I know which car I want, I think, is it a good idea to rent the car first instead of just going and buying the car? Is that kind of like how cognitive
That's
script
such a great example. Yes. So the cognitive script, sometimes what's interesting is that you don't notice that it's a script. You don't notice that it's because maybe a friend has been driving a similar car or you saw an ad several times. They're very good at implanting scripts in our minds. That's what they're designed for. And you can't experiment with everything and you can't run an unlimited number of experiments at the same time. When a scientist is in the lab, they're usually running maybe 1 or 2 experiments at the same time because you need to keep track of what's happening. You only have 24 hours in the day. You need to sleep. So it's very similar in your life and your finances too. You need to choose what you're going to experiment with. And as I mentioned earlier, you also need to be in a situation where it's okay if the experiment fails. Because with any kind of scientific experiment, again, the goal is not to succeed. The goal is not to get the answer you expected. It's to learn something new. So I really don't recommend experimenting with things where if the experiment doesn't go to plan, you're going to be in a very bad financial situation.
Do you think people should totally abandon goals then and goal setting or in favor of experiments?
No, they work in tandem. So it's a little bit as the same with goals and habits. The main issue I have with them is that we just go for them straight away. We just assume that they're good. So we say, I'm going to build the habit of, going to the gym once a day, every week. I'm going to build the habit of drinking water. I'm going to do this habit. With goals, it's the same. I'm going to have the goal of saving X amount of money so I can go on a holiday at the end of this year. I'm going to have the goal of buying a car in the next 2 years. Experiments should come before. So especially for big goals or habits that are significantly going to change your life, instead of assuming that's what you want and that is good for you, first experiment. And if the answer is yes, that is something I actually want, despite the cognitive scripts and despite the fact, the assumptions that I've made, etc. Actually, now I know this is what I want. Then you can turn it into a goal and you can break it down and say, okay, so I'm sure I want this car now. So that's how much I should save every month, for example, if I want to buy this car. So not getting rid of goals, but again, being a bit more intentional and experimenting a little bit more before you set those goals.
One of the worst things that I see in my world is scammers who pretend to be me or the podcast and then try and get money out of people who follow us. And sadly, these scammers are getting better and better by the day, which is one of the reasons that we're really happy that we're partnering up with Vanta, who help businesses be secure and then prove that they're secure. Vanta automates compliance for stuff like GDPR, ISO 27001, SOC 2 and more, helping businesses build customer trust. The beauty of Vanta is they save companies a lot of time and money because proving you're secure without them really is an enormous faff. It can take months of work and form filling. Over 9,000 companies like Atlassian, Flow Health and Cora use Vanta to manage their risk and prove their security in real time. If you need to prove that your business is secure and compliant, you can get $1,000 off by going to vanta.com/makingmoney. I've left a link in the description for you.
Could we design a little experiment now or something that people could use maybe around their finances or something, just so people can know what that looks like? Because, go and experiment with your money and you start like spanking money on stuff and your partner's like, what are you doing or something?
I'm experimenting.
Yeah, I'm experimenting.
I got a new chain.
Yeah,
She's like, what?
I mean, yeah.
That is not
Yeah,
experimenting.
exactly. So what I was about to say what would the goal be, but that's wrong, isn't it?
No goal, yeah. But I like the fact that you mentioned partners because I also think it can be really fun to experiment with your partner instead of just doing it on your own and having them like, what are you doing? Can do it together. So, okay, let's do a tiny experiment, something very small that everybody can do. I'm going to, again, you have to take something that you do naturally, question it, and do something different.
Okay.
So, okay, everybody eats, right? So if with your partner, you tend to go out a lot and spend quite a bit of money every week just going out and going to restaurants, a tiny experiment could say, once a week, we both stay home and we go to the supermarket together. We buy food, we cook it, and we save money. And also we see how that feels. So external signals is probably saving a bit of money on the bank account, but also how does that feel? Do we like it? And you kind of reflect on this. And you can say, let's do that for a month. And at the end of the month, we look back and we decide if we want to keep going. If on the other hand, you're a very frugal couple, you always eat at home, it would probably for most people be okay to say that over the next month, once a week, you're actually going to go out. And that doesn't mean you go to a Michelin restaurant, right? So you can have a nice pizza down the road, right? And just say, once a week, we go on a date night together. And we know it's going to cost a little bit more money than usual, but same. At the end of the month, let's look back. External signals, probably going to cost a bit more money than eating something from Tesco. But internal signals, what does that feel like? What is the impact on our relationship? Are we having better conversations when we're sitting across the table without our phones because we feel like we paid for this meal and so we need to talk to each other? Mm-hmm. Or actually, were we okay eating from our kitchen at home with a Tesco meal, which might be the case? So that can be a very small, fun experiment to do together and where you can apply all of the principles we discussed, where you collect that data and then you analyze it together. And depending on the result, you decide whether you want to keep going or you can maybe tweak it or you can stop.
Yeah, so I mean, I wasn't an intentional experiment, but I noticed with our food shopping, let's say we spend 100 plus a week on food and we were ending up eating out maybe or getting takeaway twice a week. And it's like, that ends up being 40 quid every time. So I was like, we're spending 80 quid here on takeaways because we're lazy. So I found a meal delivery service that's, it's actually Plant Hood, not sponsored, but they deliver like vegan meal prep things and my partner's vegan. 70 quid for two of us to eat for 5 days. So we started ordering those. We don't order takeaways anymore and we actually reduced our food shop. So I was always like, oh no, those meal things are too expensive. We tried it for a few weeks. We've been using it now for like 7 months. So I guess in a way, it's like challenge the norm of, in my head, I was like, we buy all our own food because it's cheaper. But then when I looked at it, actually what we were doing was spending 80 quid a week on takeaways as well on all the nights where I was like, I can't be bothered to cook.
And that thinking that it was too expensive, again, might have been a script from hearing some friends saying this or just assuming it. And so that's actually a really good example of saying, let's just try it. And if you can afford it, if it's not a very risky experiment to do, just try it and then you can decide.
Yeah, I mean, in the same way with the YouTube channel, I had this kind of script of only I can edit my videos the way I can. I put in a video, I did a trial with a video editor, I realized he was better. And, now we've got the podcast, all this because I freed up time by hiring an editor. So it's like these little tiny things of,
Yeah, that's amazing. And you've basically described the entire process where you take an assumption, something you think you deeply believe is true. When you start examining your work, your life, your projects, your finances, everything, and you look at the things that you just think are true. And for you to, like those meal kits are too expensive. Or, I'm saving time by editing my videos myself, etc. You'll notice there are so many areas where it's just a script. It's not based on any reality, any actual data. And it's maybe worth experimenting with that.
So cognitive scripts, I know it's not the same, but is it a little bit of cognitive bias in there? Like you have preconceived ideas of something, so you can use it for, is there anything you can't use it for? You can use it for like bad habits, finances?
Yeah,
anything.
They're related in the sense that the cognitive biases that you have are likely to make you more prone to fall prey to specific scripts. So if you grew up in a family, for example, where maybe your parents really didn't have a lot of money and you were always being very careful about how much you were spending, you're maybe more likely to fall prey to those scripts about it's not worth looking at those meal kits because they're too expensive. So they are kind of interconnected. And so I'm glad you asked this, because then you can basically also looking at your biases, probably start noticing more scripts through this. Yeah. So that's actually helpful to also think about those biases.
But I just said that because I remember him. He used to be like, my precious editing. No one can touch it. It's my baby. I love it so much. And then once he did, he's like, oh, I've got loads of free time now. So it's like, you might have these deep preconceived notions and you're like, no one else can do this. And then you're like, oh, I just saved like 10 hours in my week or something. So
Yeah.
Or things like I should buy a house.
Yeah. I think that's a very big cognitive script. Like you said, go to uni, get a job, buy a house, and then times change and it's not quite the same as it used to be 20 years ago.
Exactly.
One of the pillars of personal finance is having an emergency fund so that you can withstand financial shocks. But the value of holding on to lots of cash beyond that is questionable because it just gets eaten away by inflation. You should put that money to work, and really the same goes for any money that's in your business. There's an amount you want to hold in your business account to ensure that you can weather any storms, but then you want to put the rest of the money to work, and where should you do that? I use Tide's Instant Saver account for this scenario, and they're offering new customers 3.81% AER variable on unlimited deposits until June 1st, 2025. I even use it for stuff like putting all my tax money in, so my up and coming VAT bill, I stick it in there so I can generate a little bit of a return on it in the meantime. If you'd like to give it a go, then use the code MAKINGMONEYQ1 and you'll get £100 if you add £5,000 in the first 30 days. There's a link in the description for you where you can also find a link to the full T's and C's and Tides terms. The variable rate is correct as of the 6th of February, 2025.
I just don't know how easy it is for someone to say, like, this is something that I'm lying to myself about, or that I accept as true.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like,
It's hard. It's really hard. And that's why I wrote an entire book about it, right? It's not something you can just do very easily. But once you understand how it works, it's something you can inject in your life a little bit of. It doesn't have to be changing everything. Again, you don't have to, and you really shouldn't experiment with absolutely everything. But it's just a way to start looking at your life in a slightly different way, and to be more connected to your decisions and understand why you behave this way, why you make those choices. This keyword, again, of intentionality. And what's great about it is that if you start doing this, when you look back and maybe things have become a little bit difficult or you're not quite sure where you're going, you can look back and remember, oh, but actually I made that choice at the time because those were the things that actually mattered to me. Not because other people told me to do it, but because that mattered to me. And that's why I bought the house, or that's why I decided not to buy the house. That's why I got this car, or I didn't. And it's very helpful to have this confidence in your decisions rather than making them automatically.
yeah, especially like, for example, politics would be a good example. You might be, oh, I believe this set of ideals or ideologies. Go and read a newspaper from the other side every week or something, and see if they
That'd be a really good experiment. Yeah.
see if it convinces you of that argument or makes you see it in a different way.
Exactly. And again, if it actually reinforces whatever you think, at least you've tried to have a look at a different way of thinking about things. You've opened your mind to those different perspectives. And so now you know why you think what you think.
Do you think people have time for this in their lives?
They have very little time for it. And this is also why I wouldn't try to do everything. And it's really just about carving out a little bit of time. That's why I love Plus Minus Next so much, because it really shouldn't take more than 3 to 5 minutes every week. That's it. We've been talking a lot about experiments, but how do you know how they're doing? How do you know what's working and what's not working? And that's what Plus Minus Next is. I'm scared you're going to hit that button because I'm going to use a word that's a little bit more complicated.
I'm ready and itching to hit it.
So metacognition. Metacognition means thinking about thinking. And very often we're...
Mental cognition.
Like
Metacognition.
Facebook Meta.
Yes. Yeah. Metacognition. So it means thinking about thinking. And very often we're so busy with our lives that we don't even have time to think about anything, right? We're just, let's do, execute. So when we don't have time to think, we also have little time to think about the way we're thinking about things. And that's what metacognition is. It's really turning your attention inwards and asking yourself, why am I making those decisions? How do I feel about this decision? And what's very useful here is that when we do experiments or we pursue our goals or we try to build habits, very often we focus only on the external signs of success. So let's say that you decide, I want to, actually, this is an example that I went through that experiment. I tried to create a YouTube channel. And so I said, I'm going to do this experiment. For 6 months, I'm going to publish one video every week. External signs of success were pretty good. Got to 10,000 subscribers and people liked my videos. But internal signals, every time I had to sit in front of the camera, I was dreading it.
It's not easy, is it?
I hated it. It's so hard. And I feel like this kind of conversation where I can get feedback, I have 2 human beings in front of me is fine. But this like cold, dark eye of the camera looking at me, not knowing how people would react, I was so stressed about it. And that's what metacognition is about. It's not just looking at the money on your bank account or the number of subscribers on YouTube. It's looking at how does it feel? What does this success feel like? Or this failure feel like? Because sometimes maybe the external signals are not so good, but you love doing it. You love this side project. You love working on the home renovations, even though it does cost a little bit of money, right? So plus minus next is a tool for metacognition. Now I go back to the very simple stuff because it's such a simple tool. It's 3 columns. You can do it in a notebook. It's bullet points. You're not writing a novel. It's not journaling. It's really just writing a few bullet points. What went well? What didn't? What I want to focus on next. And so that's why I'm not advocating for journaling for 2 hours every morning or anything like that, right? It's really just about this minimum amount of metacognition that you inject in your life. And that will help you be more intentional with the direction of your life in general, because those little iterations and those moments of self-reflection, they do add up every week. And you end up choosing things and going in directions that actually make sense for you.
Do you think it still allows people to be spontaneous, this way of living?
Absolutely. I think there's a massive gap in between injecting 5 minutes of intentionality in your week and being on autopilot like a robot for the entire rest of the week. We're still human beings. We are going to be spontaneous. And actually that might be the problem, is that a lot of the decisions we're making are impulsive or based on those cognitive scripts that we discussed. So I'm really not worried that by being a little bit more intentional, we start not having any spontaneity anymore.
Mm-hmm. You talk in the book about community and how that is like a crucial element of this. Why do you think community is so important?
We all, whether you want it or not, we're all part of communities. And that can be as small as your roommate or a colleague or a fellow student or your manager or your partner. There is also quite a lot of research that shows that we tend to make better decisions and we tend to think more creatively if we do it together. You can take that and inject that in your daily life and in your decisions and even your financial decisions by bringing other people as part of the decision-making process.
What about in areas, so for example, finance can have quite negative communities, quite bad, like echo chambers. People get you to buy all sorts, don't they? It's like crypto, like Tamaine likes, just finding good quality communities is not necessarily that easy online. And I think, people can go seek them out and end up in bad places. Do you have any advice there at all?
Ideally, this is the way it's been done. And with the internet, it's a bit harder. But if you look at the way it's been done for hundreds and thousands of years, is that we tend to join communities based on the recommendation of someone we trust. That's the way we've been doing it for the longest time. You have someone you trust who tells you, I'm part of this community, I'm very happy with it, you should join too. With the internet, we tend to read some random copy on a landing page and we're like, I trust this person.
He's on my computer. He must be telling the truth.
Exactly. Yeah. Take my credit card. Which doesn't really make sense. So that's the first piece of advice I would give is, if possible, try to join communities where you know at least one person in real life who can be accountable, sort of, for the quality of the experience that you're going to have. Like a mate of yours who you can be like, that community is so bad, why did you invite me to this? So that would be the first thing. And the second one is going back to the internal signals that I mentioned earlier. we tend to ignore these quite often. And I think we should trust those instincts a little bit more. Very often when I see friends who put themselves in bad situations, joining some communities that are toxic, not helpful, actually they had mentioned some red flags at the time and they chose to ignore them. So I think if you feel, especially when it comes to money, if you join a program or a community at any point in the process of joining, there's something that doesn't feel quite right, it's better to make the mistake of not joining that community, even though it would have been a lot of fun and amazing, than the other mistake of joining and then you put yourself in a bad or risky situation.
As a neuroscientist, why do we ignore red flags? Because I ignore them all. I'm colorblind. I'm a red flag. I'm colorblind to red flags. Like I literally don't see them. I mean, I see them like, because you're just saying community. I just thought one of the communities I'm in has got some red flags because it's on Telegram and it's a finance.
Red flag.
Yeah, to be honest, that's probably it. It's a finance one, but they keep getting all these like bots coming in and trying to say, oh, follow my page. If you're looking for a companion, I'm looking for some love or something. And it's like, how did this person get into this community? And they're all like fake accounts. But why do we ignore red flags generally?
It's a very modern problem that we have. The issue is that most of the signals that tell you that something is a red flag come from the body. I'm going to use it's the last neuroscientific word I use, promise, but it's called interoception. So you know how I said metacognition is thinking about thinking? Interoception is your ability with your brain to understand the signals coming from your body. So as I said earlier, a knot in your stomach, your heart starts beating faster, sweat in your hand, little things like these. And sometimes it can be a tingle in your skin, those kind of things. Those are also signals that usually tell you danger. Something is wrong here. And in today's society, we're so focused on using our brains and our cognitive abilities that we have become a bit disconnected from listening to those signals. And this is a big part of the problem, is that even though your bodily signals, interoception, is telling you danger, 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 something is wrong, run, your brain is going to be able to interpret that in a way that makes sense. But we're smart. We know, right? We've been online forever. I'm an internet kid. I would know if someone was trying to scam me, right? We're all right. And we just ignore these things. So that's the main reason why we've become quite bad at listening to those bodily signals.
Mm-hmm. And if someone's feeling uncertain about like direction, goals, life, for someone living in London, say, who's waking up to the realization that they might not be able to own a home here, but they want one, moving up north is like a massive kind of thing, or moving somewhere else in the world. Do you have any scientific ways of approaching uncertainty and the concern there?
Yeah, there's a measure in psychology that is your tolerance to uncertainty. And it's been shown that people who have more tolerance to uncertainty end up being more successful in life because they try more things. They're a bit more okay with a little bit of risk. The thing with uncertainty is that whether you want it or not, it's going to be here. So you can either resist it, try to control it, try to reduce the uncertainty, which is not going to be successful. You can't really do this. Or you can accept it and embrace it. And so I would consider where you're at in your life and what kind of wiggle room you have for experimentation. Obviously, it's not going to look the same for someone who's fresh out of university, maybe doesn't have kids yet, doesn't have a partner yet, and someone who already has 2 kids and a partner who has a job in London. You have completely different parameters. So I would first look at your parameters at the moment, and within that, see how much you can experiment. When I was 21, I took all of my stuff and I moved to New York for a job that was not very well paid, that had nothing to do with what I wanted to do in my life. I was selling French wine and it was not good wine. And they only hired me because I had the thickest French accent at the time. And apparently it helped with selling the wine. And that's where I learned how to speak English properly. And I could only do this because, again, no kids at the time, no partner. And also, I didn't care about sleeping on a really shitty mattress on the floor in the Bronx. It didn't matter to me. And so that's a risk I took at the time. And I also knew that, you know what, worst case scenario, what could happen really? I would lose the little savings I had at the time, which really, it wasn't a lot. I was 21. I still had a lot of time to start over if things went wrong, right? And if you're in a different situation, then just ask yourself, is there a way, if you're working for a company, to ask if you can do a 6-month contract in a different city, for example? Just talk to your boss if you've been in the company for a while and say, can I work remotely for 6 months from this different city? If you're freelancing, for example, no partner, you can work remotely, then go. I have so many friends who've done this. They literally, they book Airbnbs, but not for a weekend. They go for 3 months or 4 months and they work from there.
You get 50% discount if you book over
Yes.
it ends up being pretty reasonable.
Or over a certain amount of time.
I think, if you...
Over 30 days,
over 30 days, you get like a massive discount on an Airbnb.
Yeah. And same thing, you might, might lose a little bit of money compared to renting your usual flat. But if you do it in a way that is kind of intentional, where you sublet whatever place where you're living and you do that. So there are lots of ways to experiment. It's really, again, about not having those assumptions that it's impossible.
Yeah, I think that is probably one thing that I'm not an adult unless I buy a house, unless I stay here and have a kid and all of these kind of things. I mean, I remember though, you sound like in your 20s you had your head screwed on, or you were open to expansion and failure, whereas I was kind of like, I need to be rich right now. I got 5 years before I'm old. I was like catastrophized my whole life and thought that if I'm not on the path to financial success by the age of 25, I'm somehow a failure. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, same for me. I mean,
I thought I was a lot older than I was.
Oh,
you when you get to 36, as I am now, I look back and go, you're a kid, you should have lived a lot more.
Yeah. I left my job at Google when I was 27 because I thought I was so late that I hadn't started a $1 billion company yet. So it's not even that, I had figured it out a little bit earlier. And
so that's a script from that world, right?
That was
because
exactly.
I bet it's full of like founder wannabes at Google.
And that's where I got that script. And I didn't have it when I was 21. And then I started working at Google, and everybody around me, that was the script. You work at Google for a few years and then you leave and you start a startup and you raise a lot of money. And at 27, I hadn't done that yet.
And then you blow it all.
Yeah.
Out of business, it doesn't work.
Exactly. And that's exactly what I did. I left Google. I had a really good job and I did a startup, and the startup didn't work out. So, that's why I think it's really important. 2 things. First one is that it's not because to look at for scripts that it won't happen again in your life. At some point, they're so insidious that it will happen. And that's okay. It's really all about noticing when it happens and be like, oh, no, another script that happened. That's okay. Let's go back to being more open and experimental. And the second one is that there's no timeline. There's really no timeline. We tend to compare ourselves to each other. It's like we're looking at this leaderboard of who's doing what, who's being faster, doing, better work, etc. But really nobody cares and nobody's looking at you, right? Mm-hmm. The only metric that's important is your own life satisfaction. And if you're optimizing for that, and by optimizing, again, I just mean being a bit intentional every week, I think asking yourself, how do I feel? What does this life I'm currently building look like? What are areas where I'm quite unsure? I have doubts. Where can I experiment? What are things I can try? You're going to be on the path to success based on your own definition of success, not a cognitive script that you've copy-pasted from someone else.
I like the whole, applying the scientific method to life, because I think we do I'm just like swinging in the dark.
You were born in the darkness. You like to be in your little YouTube cave, in his dark cave, just like talking to the camera, doing impulsive things.
So on Thursday, I'm going out for it's kind of like a meetup of all the UK finance creators, and they all know each other. I know none of them because I find it really useful to just imagine that they're all evil. And do you know what I mean? I hate them. Hate them all. I don't hate them. I'm joking, but like, you know, you're talking about community, and it probably holds me back. They all have these all meetups. You all know each other. I'm just like, I don't need to speak to any of you. Like, leave me in my little dark hole.
Yeah.
Like making my content.
But you know, when you come back, like try maybe the plus minus next when you come back from that. Like see what you liked, what you hated.
Yeah.
And then in the next column, do you want to go back to another one, or actually, you know what? Like that was no, I don't want to keep going to these next.
Yeah. That's that.
Just don't walk out there with a new best friend. That's all I can do.
Yeah.
Like there's a new team here.
I got a quick question for you. Are your finances in good shape? Is there anything that you might be missing? It can be a difficult question to answer this. So what we've done is we've put together a free financial health check to give you a rough gauge on where you're at, what you can improve and how. There's a link in the description if you want to give it a go.